A popular delusion is the idea that advertising makes bestsellers, that a publisher only has to open the checkbook, turn on the faucet, and bingo, to the bestseller list. Every publisher will tell you that advertising sells books only when the book is already selling. Something else must give it a start, and then advertising will make it keep going. It is not true that the publisher who does the most advertising has the most bestsellers. It is more likely to be true that the publisher who has the most bestsellers does the most advertising. Seldom does a publisher alone make a bestseller. Advertising will supply momentum, but will not overcome inertia. To authors, it will come as incredible that advertising does not sell books. Yet that is the truth. Advertising does not sell books.
Every human being, across all time and space, we've been hardwired for stories.
There are no breaks in this business. You make your breaks.
The reason I'm in this room right now is because my music's very dope.
Let's try to find something that people remember 20 years later.
Break rules. Leave the world more interesting for your being here. Make good art.
You're only given a little spark of madness. And if you lose that, you're nothing.
The quote I just read you is from the 1939 book Bestsellers. Are They Born or Made? This book was essentially a textbook for publishers about what actually made a bestseller. And even though it's written for publishers, I still think there's a lot of really relevant lessons in here for artists. And what's interesting about these lessons is if you can find something that was relevant in 1939 that's just as relevant today, there's a really good chance it's going to continue to be relevant tomorrow. This book was written by 3 people, and they each had their own section of the book. The first section was called The Advertising of Books, which was written by Stanley Unwin. Stanley Unwin is the reason we are studying this book today. Every single episode of Artwell is connected to one that came before. We've done an episode on Stanley, who is the publisher of The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. The middle section of this book was written by George Stevens, who's a book publisher from the US, whereas Stanley's from the UK. His 2 most prominent roles were probably a Doubleday and Lippincott, and his section of the book is called Lincoln's Doctor's Dog. And the reason it's called that is because there was this belief in publishing at the time that any book about Abraham Lincoln became a bestseller. Any book about a doctor became a bestseller, and any book about a dog became a bestseller. So if you wrote a book about Lincoln's Doctor's Dog, you had a guaranteed bestseller on your hands. The third section of this book is called Authors and Advertising, and it is written by Frank Swinnerton. He brings the artist's perspective because he was an English novelist with more than 50 books. And what's interesting about this book is it's actually really hard to find. I read about it when I was reading Stanley Unwin's memoir, and he mentioned he wrote this book. And so I Googled it. I tried to find a copy. I was like, maybe the Internet Archive will have one. Sometimes you can get PDFs of old books to read. They didn't have it. I looked on eBay. They didn't have it. I looked on 8 Books and they had a copy, but it was $90. Shipping was expensive and there was no pictures. I was like, I'm not going to take a chance on this. And then I was like, maybe by some chance the Toronto Public Library will have a copy. So I went on the TPL website and I looked it up. Sure enough, they had a copy. But you couldn't just ask to read this book. What you had to do, you had to put in a special request because they only had 1 copy and it wasn't on the shelf anywhere. It was at the Toronto Reference Library in the archives. I put in this special request. They went and got the book from the archive for me. I read it in a single sitting because you can't take the books home when they come from the archive. Luckily, it's pretty short. It's like 125 pages, so I read it in a couple of hours 2 days ago. Yesterday, I sat down and I wrote the outline for this episode, and today I'm going to share with you everything I learned studying bestsellers. Are they born or made? I'm your host, Jacob Kelly, and this is Artwell. One of my core beliefs that I've learned doing Artwell is that if you are taking the time to make something, if you are putting in the days, weeks, months, years to write a book, and you're putting that into the world, you're doing so with, if not the expectation, the hope that people are going to consume that thing. And therefore, it is your responsibility as an artist to do the work to get people to experience it. The work of making it is only half the battle. You then have to put in all the work again to make sure people see it. And for a long time, when people would say that my work is just for me, my art is just for me, I don't care if people see it, and yet they're still posting it and they're hoping people do, the belief that I had, and I learned this from Cory Barlog, who directed the God of War video games, that people use that as a defense mechanism. My art's just for me. So therefore, if nobody ends up seeing it, then that's okay because it's just for me. You're like hedging against no one seeing your work. But it was after reading this book and doing this outline and reflecting on what I'd learned, I came to a realization. Part of the reason I think people say that their art is just for them is because they just don't want to do the work to advertise it, to promote it, to get it in front of other people. They put in all the work to get to the point of publication, and then they don't have it in them to put in the work to actually get that thing out there. And so they say it's just for them so they don't have to put in the work. But my belief, again, is that if you're putting your work in, you're doing so with the expectation that people see it, therefore you have a responsibility as an artist to get that work in front of people. Well, this book, again, written in 1939, was written for publishers. It was done so because at the time, the people who were responsible for promoting books and getting them into the hands of the public was the publisher. It was not the artist. But in today's world, the artist is just as much, if not more responsible than the publisher for the distribution of their book, for promoting their book. But the problem is people advertise their art incorrectly. Because advertising does not sell books. People think that in order to get people interested in what they've made, they just have to promote it. They just have to post it on Instagram and people are going to consume it. But here's the thing, and this is how Stanley puts it. Just as whipping will maintain and even accelerate the speed of a top that is already spinning, but will achieve nothing with one lying dormant on the ground, so advertising will maintain and even accelerate the sales of a book which is already being talked about, but will do little or nothing for one in which there is otherwise no interest. So what he's saying here is if you have a top that's spinning, if you flick it, it's going to keep spinning. You're going to add momentum. It might even get a little bit faster. But if you have a top that's laying on a side and you flick it, that top's not all of a sudden going to stand up and start spinning. It needs to already be spinning for the work you're doing to mean anything to keep it spinning. And it's the same thing with selling books. If you have a book that nobody's interested in, putting that book in front of more people isn't going to all of a sudden make them interested. In order for the advertising to be effective, you need to have something that's good enough that when people... it's good enough that, one, people are interested enough to read it. They read it. It's good enough that they're going to tell their friends and family about it. There's already some word of mouth bubbling. Because really, like, the punchline of this book, if you're busy and you want to stop after this, I understand. The punchline of this book is without word of mouth, you have nothing. No amount of advertising is going to get people interested in something they're not interested in. No amount of advertising is going to get people interested in a bad book. You need to have, the art itself needs to be good enough for advertising to work. And I think it's another discouraging thing, right? Like if you've put in all of this work to make something, advertising and nobody being interested can make you feel bad, because if you not only put in the work to make the thing, but then you put in the work to try and get people to see it and people still don't like it and they still don't read it, that can be discouraging. And so by not advertising, I just had an unlock. Doing this right now. By not advertising, you're limiting the amount of people who could see your work and not like it. If nobody sees your work, this is the defense mechanism. It's a defense mechanism against nobody seeing it. It's a defense mechanism against people seeing it and not liking it. Because when you advertise your book, and if the advertising doesn't work, it means people aren't interested in, it means the thing you made isn't as good as you think it is. And as an artist, you're putting so much of yourself into this thing that you've made. Obviously, that's going to hurt. So if you don't advertise it, great. Then all you have is your opinion of the work. You don't have the opinions of others. But the punchline is, like, advertising alone does not sell books. You need something that people are interested in, that is good enough, that people are talking about. Because without word of mouth, you have nothing. And as I was reading this book in the Toronto Reference Library, another book kept popping up in my mind as I was reading it. And it was a book written like 70 years after the publication of Bestsellers. And it was Perennial Seller by Ryan Holiday. And this book, again, very similar. It's about what makes work that lasts. So a little bit different. Bestseller can, in the sense, be in the immediate term, what leads to people buying something right now. Perennial Seller is more like what leads to people buying a work kind of forever. So these two things really work as a good complement to each other, almost as like a sequel. And in this book, Ryan Holiday, who wrote Perennial Seller, is talking about, he's actually quoting an article talking about this drug that this guy tried to market and write a book about. And Ryan wrote, if a book is a flop, publishers say not even a fortune can turn it into a bestseller. The article goes on to tell the cautionary tale of a businessman who spent $2 million of his own money to promote a book he'd written about a supposed breakthrough drug called phenytoin. More than 30 years after the book's publication, it has 11 reviews on Amazon, and his strange campaign has been almost entirely forgotten. In addition to the book, he spent something like $70 million promoting phenytoin as a treatment for depression, which, suffice to say, was not successful. And here is the most important line. Advertising can add fuel to a fire, but rarely is it sufficient to start one. Advertising can add fuel to a fire, but rarely is it sufficient to start one. You need to have people interested. There has to be something there in order for you to advertise. You can't advertise something that isn't real. And by real, I mean like real interest, real word of mouth. And I can hear the arguments already of like, what are you talking about? Like, yes, you can advertise. People respond to advertising. People will buy books because of advertising. And here's Stanley's rebuttal, and then I have one too. Of course, there are instances of sales following lavish advertising. There's a case cited by Mr. Michael Sadlier in Publishers Advertising, which was a book written in 1930, of a shilling, like the price of $1 book, of which 100,000 copies were sold within 5 days. But as it cost about £4,000 to sell about £3,000 worth of books, it would have been cheaper to give them away. So what he's saying is that this book, they spent so much in advertising that the cost per book was elevated, that if they'd just given the book away, the amount they would have lost would have been less than selling the books because of the advertising. And my rebuttal of this idea of like, yes, you can get people to buy things because of advertising. Of course you can. Advertising can lead to a great first weekend at the box office. Advertising cannot lead to a second great weekend at the box office. You need word of mouth, and word of mouth works in both directions. If your movie's really good, that is going to, of course, your advertising will then accelerate that and get people into the theaters for the second weekend. If your movie's really bad and word gets out that your movie is really bad, no amount of advertising is going to convince people that it's not bad if everybody's talking about how it is bad. And so what you want to do with advertising, and of course, I understand the way the world works and with movies is a little bit different, but make sure you have a winning hand before putting money down. Make sure you actually have something real in order to push out there. And I guess when I say like, make sure you have a hand before putting money out there, because when you think of advertising, it's really sharp, like putting money to try and get your work out more broadly. And the problem is if you do that in the beginning, you run into an issue. Like you can't just spray and pray. Because when I think of advertising, I truly think more broadly. And in order to kind of create that word of mouth, to start to get some traction with your work, you have to be more precise. Like advertising is easy because you can, in the context of this book, they always talk about like putting a big ad in a newspaper that everybody reads can make you feel good about yourself. Like we spent all this money, we're getting in front of this many people. Like look at all the work we're doing to promote this book. But that actually is kind of the equivalent of running in place. You're doing all this work, you're spending all this money, you're getting in front of all these people, but you're not actually getting anywhere. Like if you run in place for a long time, you're going to feel tired, but you're not really accomplishing much. Because if you just spray and pray and try and get your work out there in front of as many eyeballs as possible, if you're getting in front of the wrong eyeballs, it doesn't matter. Like Stanley said, one is more likely to hit the bullseye by aiming somewhere in the direction of the target than by shooting vaguely in the air. In the beginning, when you want to create that initial bit of inertia, you're not going to do that with advertising. You have to be more specific. Because if you go where everyone is making noise, if you're just posting on social media, you're competing with everybody else who's posting on social media. And again, like you can feel like you're doing work when you do that because social media is built in distribution. But if you're going to try and get that initial word of mouth going, you have to create that. And advertising is far more passive. We're just putting the thing out there and hoping it works. But to create word of mouth takes work. And if you just go where everyone else is, you're not going to stand out. That's true of social media, but that's also even true back in 1939. Stanley Unwin said, if one or two people in a crowd shout, theirs will doubtless be the voices that are heard. But when everybody shouts, no one's voice will make much impression, and it is unlikely that those most worth listening to will be heard. This is the position of much book advertising today. Publishers shout in larger and larger type, and less attention is paid to what they say. When I was doing this outline, I was sitting in a coffee shop, and I wrote this line. It was like 8:30 in the morning, and I had like a stank face because I was so stoked with this line. When it comes to creating the initial inertia behind your work, getting the early fans, creating that word of mouth, don't shout into the void. Don't try and scream where everybody else is screaming. Go where they can hear you whisper. Go where they can hear you whisper. Don't try to advertise your art next to everybody else, to try and yell as loud as you can to try and get somebody to pay attention to you. Go where nobody else is, so that when you do try to get people to look at your work, they're going to be more likely to pay attention. Because the way you compete with everybody shouting is you get so many people shouting with you, so much word of mouth, that people will actually hear you in that crowded room. Because when everybody is shouting about something different in this crowded room, of course, no one's going to hear everybody. But if there's 100 people in a crowded room that are yelling, and you show up with 50 people all yelling the same thing, eventually those 100 people are going to pay attention to you because of the amount of people who are yelling. That is what word of mouth does. You're not going to stand out in the crowded room by yourself. You need to go to a smaller room where nobody else is and whisper to a few people who are going to pay attention to you. You're not going to the crowded room and screaming. You're not going to boil the ocean, but what you can do is boil the ocean one pot at a time. That's the thing that this guy Charlie Rocket talks about. He has many things. He's a motivational speaker, but he really kind of came up as a manager of rap artists in Atlanta. And what he said was when they were trying to get his artists attention, he would go to like one school and he would get that one school to start talking about that artist. Then he would go to another school. He would get that other school to start talking about the artist. And he would slowly boil the ocean one pot at a time. You want to find that little corner where everybody can hear you whisper, and you want to get them on board. And then you want to go to the next room that's a little bit bigger, but you have the people with you and they're going to spread that message as well. And eventually your work is going to spread and spread and spread. And I thought about this because when I was doing this outline, I caught myself and I was like, wait, but if you're not trying to get your work out there, like if in order to get your work out there, you have to start small, is that counter to this idea of like how I've defined greatness in the past is like depth times width of impact? And is going to these small rooms counter to that? Does that mean that you're making something that's not going to be applicable to the masses? And I think that's wrong, because I think what I'm saying here in this idea of boiling the ocean, the conclusion I came to is if you make art for everyone, you make art for no one. Like that's not an original idea. But what you want to do is you want to make this specific art and you want to get everybody interested in that art. And you do that by, again, you start small, you boil one pot at a time until you've boiled the ocean. And when choosing where to go in the beginning, when you're like, what's that room where people are going to hear me whisper? Where should I go with this? Who should I talk to? Be strategic. Like go and find the people who you think would actually be interested in what you've made. I'm sure the people who follow you on Instagram are very supportive. They're your friends. They love you. But that doesn't mean they're going to like your art. Like you have to go find the right people who are going to be interested. Like the way Stanley puts it is it's hard enough to convince people who are interested to buy your book. And so if you're going to go and try and convince somebody who's not interested in your book to buy it, it's going to be infinitely harder. So when you're boiling the ocean, start with the people who you think would already be interested in this thing, make them aware of it. And that is how you get your early fans. You're not going to get it by trying to convince people who aren't interested to consume your work, to listen to your music, to listen to your podcast. You're going to boil the ocean one pot at a time, and make sure you start with the right pot of water. And the way you're going to do this, right? Like I think part of the the advantage, the reason people like advertising, in the case of Stanley Unwin, 1909, that was doing big ads in popular newspapers. In the case now, we could count that potentially as social media. Is it's easy to do, right? Like we talked about, it's easy to feel good about yourself. Like, I've done the thing. We bought the ad. If it doesn't work, oh well. I've made the videos for social media. If nobody watches, oh well. Like I tried. But actually, like trying is much. The reason people do that is because it's easy, right? Like you can post on social media, you can reach everybody. You can put it out in your newspaper, you'll reach everybody. But in order to boil that first pot of water, you're going to have to do things that don't actually scale. Like one ad in the newspaper can reach thousands of people. One video on social media could reach millions of people. But to get that initial inertia, you can't do that. What you need to do to get that initial inertia is to go after less people, which feels counterintuitive, right? Like if you want your work to be out there, you should just try and get in front of as many people as possible. But that's spraying and praying. You want to be more precise. And so what you should do is you want to, like to stand out, obviously you're going to have to go where no one else is going, right? That's what I'm saying when you have to go where people can hear you whisper. What I mean is you have to go where, find those paths to getting your work out there that nobody else is taking. So people will take notice. Like, so Stanley Unwin's publishing firm was called Allen and Unwin, and they had a bestseller called Mathematics for the Million. And it was essentially a book that just made math easier for everyday people to understand. And when they had this book, before they published it, like before you could buy it, I'm actually going to read this quote from Stanley, who's going to describe what they did. As a start, every post-primary teacher of mathematics had a personal word from me, drawing his or her attention to Mr. H.G. Wells' opinion of the book. Mr. H.G. Wells is someone who gave a review of the book. But every sort of person interested in mathematics was separately considered. The statement in branch banking that mastery of its content would vastly improve the efficiency of bank staffs and that branchmen should everywhere have the book available for occasional reading was followed up with. The whole field of accountancy was carefully studied. There was probably no direction which mathematics plays a prominent part that was not pursued. And then the follow-up book to Mathematics for the Million was called Science for the Citizens. And on the day of publication, 60,650 copies of 9 different handwritten letters or handwritten postcards to those known to be interested were sent to those known to be interested. Of these cards, which took over an hour each before we were satisfied with their drafting. So these two books, they didn't run ads in the popular newspaper. It would have been so much easier. It would have taken less time to get one ad in the newspaper than it would have to do one of these 9 handwritten postcards that they made for Science for the Citizens. But the thing is, it would not have been as effective. And so what they did here is they personally, for Mathematics for the Million, Stanley Unwin was personally writing to math teachers to tell them about this book that's going to make lives easier for their students. They went to the banks to help to have them buy this book, to tell them about this book, to make their staff better. They reached out to over 60,000 people they identified who would be ideal for this book, Science for the Citizens. Like these were precise forms of promoting the book that took a lot of time and a lot of effort. But as a result, they had 2 bestsellers. And granted, Science for the Citizens was a follow-up, so naturally a follow-up has the potential to become a bestseller easier than someone who's never had a bestseller before. But even Mathematics for the Millions, right? Like that's the example that stands out to me, is like they targeted people who had influence over like more people, math teachers, managers at banks. Like they went after these people with letters telling them about this book, why this book was relevant for them and for their staff. And that started the initial inertia. Right? This is something that doesn't feel like it scales. Like do things that don't scale to scale is like this famous saying. But the punchline here is like this does scale. Word of mouth scales. One letter to one teacher could actually influence 30 people. Like this is an incredibly effective way of getting your work in front of people. Finding people who the work is relevant to and sending it to them. And this is actually a strategy I'm going to start replicating for Artwell. This is an idea I had actually before reading this book, but I felt really vindicated or validated when I read this section, because what I want to start doing is I want to start sending my show to influential people is the easiest way of explaining it, whether that could be people with an audience, like actual quote unquote influencers, could be professors. Like if I find somebody who did a good lecture on J.R.R. Tolkien, that's still a teacher, I'll send them my episode on Tolkien 1 just to get their perspective on it, to share it with them, because I watched the lecture and I appreciated it, but knowing that person could also potentially share the show with their students. Or another example of this is like, even with this one, right? Like I already quoted Ryan Holiday in here. And so what I'm going to do with this episode is I'm going to reach out to Ryan Holiday and I'm going to say like, hey, I read this book that's very similar to Perennial Seller. Here's a book. Here's some interesting concepts like overlap with the book that you wrote, but this was in the 1930s. I also mentioned you in this episode. Here's the show. Here's how I found it, da, 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 da. Or another example of this is there's a guy who does a show that when people hear about Artwell, they say, it's kind of like this show for business people. The show's called Founders, and the host is David Senra, and his show's great. And he has a second show where he's interviewing founders now. His show is he reads a founder biography and summarizes it every week. And so he did this episode, he was doing this interview with this guy, and he was talking about, in the episode, he was saying how just because you love something doesn't mean it's not going to be hard work, which is something I've talked about on the show countless times. And so what I'm going to do is when the Lord of the Rings episode comes out, which I'm ahead of schedule at the time you're hearing this, when the Lord of the Rings episode comes out, I'm going to send him the episode, but I'm not going to be like, hey, David, listen to my podcast, please. That's what we're doing. What I'm going to say is I'm going to reach out to him and be like, hey, David, I was listening to your interview with Todd Graves. Loved it. Here's some of the points that I really like. There's one point that you said where you were talking about how just because you love something doesn't mean it's not going to be hard work. I do a show that's kind of like yours, but instead of founders, I focus on great artists. History's greatest artists, because he's history's greatest founders. History's greatest artists. I just did an episode on J.R.R. Tolkien, and I might link to it. And Tolkien talked about something very similar to this. I'm going to send him some of the quotes of how J.R.R. Tolkien described his work. He's like very hard labor, a lot of sweat for little output, like very taxing, all these like little words. And I'm like, I agree with you that it's not that loving something doesn't make something hard work. It's that loving something makes the hard work worth it. It makes you more likely to push through when other people would give up. And so it's in a way like telling him about my show, but also giving him an anecdote from another great person that like he would find interesting. And so I have a list of people who've like mentioned the Lord of the Rings or like have anecdotes that cross over with things that I learned doing this show. And so when I hear those, I'm going to like take that anecdote that they talked about, give them an anecdote that like supports their thoughts and ideas in a way that also mentions what my show is. And I don't know if David's actually going to listen to the podcast, but this is my strategy, right? It's like I want to send it to people like Ryan, like David, who have audiences. And even if they don't listen, if they listen and never tell anybody about it, like at least I could, get in front of these people in a way that's super relevant. And not every single time I send this to someone, like they're going to become a champion of Artwell, but there's a chance that like one or two people does. And so finding a way to get in front of people in a way that's relevant for them. And that's what I'm trying to do, because I've been posting on social media, as I mentioned, and I'll be honest, like I hate posting on social media. It's not a game I like to play. And maybe this is like me being hypocritical of like how I opened this episode talking about how like some artists just don't like to promote their work. But it's not that I don't like to promote my work. I think I just don't like social media. So I'm trying to find these other ways to get my show in front of influential people who I could learn from, people who in an ideal work become a mentor. Like that's the plan here. And it was again, really validating to know, like, this is something I wrote down as like one of my intentions for 2026 was to actually be intentional about sending the show to people in a way that's like value additive, not just like, hey, listen to my show. And so to read this example from Stanley Unwin was like, again, really validating, because this is something he was doing back in 1930 something, because it was before the publication of this book. But the thing is that in order to do that, to time this with the publication of your book, like when they sent for Science for the Citizens, they sent out 60,650 copies of 9 different handwritten postcards on the day of publication. The only way that they were able to do that was because they planned in advance. And this is another thing that artists get wrong, is they put all the time into making this thing. And I've been guilty of this, especially with, and not as much with podcasts, I do sometimes, but really with essays. You put in all this time to make something, you post it on the internet, and then you're like, oh, I have to promote this now. And you like throw it up on your Instagram story and be like, yo, new song, check it out. And that's it. But what is more important, obviously promoting your work is important and getting in front of people, but planning the promotion in advance is even more important. Here's how Stanley explains it. The importance of pre-publication work and that precious time between the completion of the production and the actual placing of the work on sale at the bookshops. Yet there are few authors who do not begrudge even a day's delay when once their work is printed. So impatient are they in most cases for the public to see their offspring that they insist upon it being thrust into the world without the preparation that may be essential to its prosperity, and which no amount of subsequent newspaper advertising can possibly make good. Post-publication publicity is no substitute for pre-publication activity, but pre-publication work calls for the individual treatment of each book, for imagination, for the application of gray matter, and a capacity to take pains. Patient hard work put in by a publisher at this stage produces no outward show and may thus be completely overlooked by the author. But it brings results. There's a few things in this quote that I want to unpack. And I've already kind of talked about one of them, this idea of like, once an author has the work done, they're like so impatient for people to see it in the world that they just throw it out there and try to figure out how people are going to read it after. But if you can just take a little bit of time in advance to get people excited, to know what the plan is going to be, once you do get your work out there, it is going to be your publicity, your promotion is going to be far more effective. Like the line where he says, where is it? Post-publication publicity is no substitute for pre-publication activity. And I think it's not that you need one or the other. I think the pre-publication activity is actually what is going to make your post-publication publicity work or worthwhile. It is that time between the finishing of your work and the publishing and promoting of it is when you come up with what the plan is going to be. And anything you can do in advance, you should be doing. But what the thing is, in that time, why you want to plan your promotion in advance is because that's where you can get creative. Like Stanley says that what pre-publication work calls for is imagination. And imagination is how you're going to figure out what that third door is, what that way of getting your work in front of relevant people is in a way that is going to work. It's how you find those people who are going to hear you whisper because nobody else is going down that path. And that requires imagination to find a way to stand out. And often, like we talked about, I mean, the application of gray matter means you're going to have to use your brain, but I think that to me, that kind of ties in with imagination, a capacity to take pains. And what he's talking about there is like when you're doing things that feel like they don't scale, when you're writing individual emails or individual letters to people, that just takes time and that just takes work. You can't scale that. And so it is doing these things that don't scale. You have to put in the imagination to figure out what the creative way of standing out in a way that isn't scalable is, and then just putting in the work to do the thing. And that is how you're going to stand out. You're not going to stand out by posting something on the internet or releasing a book or releasing a song and then going, how do I want to get this out there? Like you need, it doesn't have to be comprehensive. Have a marketing plan. I can tell you what Artwell's marketing plan is right now. It's quite simple, and it's a little bit of, it's still the social media posting, and it's the reaching out to the, what I just call influential people. And then I come up with that list of who the influential people are that I want to send the podcast to when it comes out, so that I know once the episode is published, boom, can send it to all these people in a way that's relevant and value additive. That's my simple marketing plan right now. Could it be more comprehensive? Yes. I have some other ideas, but I'll also be candid. Like the focus this year is just consistency with a little bit of distribution, but I think distribution will come next year. And that's a whole other can of worms we're not going to unpack right now. But just take that time in advance to come up with a plan of how you want to try to get your work out there. Like I understand the compulsion to get the work out there as soon as it's done. You're listening to this episode sometime in March. I'm recording this episode. It's January 13th. I want to share this now. I had a call with a friend today. I was like telling her about all of these things I learned from this book that I love. And I want you to hear this right away. But I also think by not publishing it right away, it's going to give me time to kind of build out that plan. Take the time after you finish the thing to do all the work you need to promote your work in the best way. And then once it's published, keep pushing it too. Like just because you've posted something, people also have this tendency, I guess what I'm saying here is like, they have this tendency to put their work into the world, to promote it like a little bit, and then that's it. There's nothing that says I can only promote this episode of the podcast for 2 weeks. I can promote it for 6 months if I wanted to. Like, people have this tendency to like put their work in the world and to kind of like promote it once and be like, okay, that's it, move on. Like, if you're proud of what you've made, tell people about it. Doesn't matter how old it is. Like, I will still tell people about the episodes I did on James Cameron, on George Miller, on God of War. I love my God of War episodes. Like, be proud of what you've made and promote it. Barbara Hendricks is a book publicist. She's actually Ryan Holiday's book publicist. She's also been publicist for Seth Godin, Gary Keller, John Mackey, who's the co-founder of Whole Foods. And she said, I urge authors to consider how long it took them to write their books and see them published, and to devote at least that much time to pushing them. So if it took you a month to make a song, dedicate at least a month to pushing that song. Took me 3 days to make this podcast, so I should devote at least 3 days. But typically, when you get the Artwell deep dives, like the J.R.R. Tolkien one, that was part 1, part 2 bonus content, that took 6 weeks, 8 weeks. I should be pushing that episode for 2 months, at least. And so this is the thing is like doing the work to get your, like doing the work to make the thing is only half the work that is required. You should continue doing the work. Like, the second half of that is the work to get people to see your work, right? And I think there's this idea of like, of separating this into 2 buckets, right? Like, you have art and advertising. And there's this, like, we could go around and around forever. And like, what is the most important thing to spreading your work? And the punchline is like, it's both of these things. You need great art backed by great advertising to get your work in the world. Like, great advertising or great word of mouth or great promotion. Like, these are 2 very distinct yet complementary things. Like this line here that I'm about to read you from the beginning of Lincoln's Doctor's Dog. And so we're going to like move into the lessons from this section of the book now. And for context, this Lincoln's Doctor's Dog talks about some popular bestsellers from the period. And one of the ones they talk about is Anthony Adverse, which was a Publisher's Weekly best-selling novel in the US for both 1933 and 1934. And it's like a 1,200-page epic coming-of-age story that takes this protagonist from Europe kind of all around the world in the 1800s. And so to quote Lincoln's Doctor's Dog, how did Anthony Adverse become a bestseller? Note the word how. It is not the same as the word why. This survey is not trying to decide what made the reading public eat the book. Theories about these bestsellers from the point of view of their appeal always provide fascinating material for literary bull sessions, but that kind of speculation is about as trustworthy as astrology. However, facts are available about the publication of bestsellers. The publisher can tell you what he did to promote them, how much money he spent advertising them, how many copies they sold, and over how long of a period of time. If we cannot attempt to explain why Anthony Adverse became a bestseller, we can pretty clearly describe how. And I really like this idea of separating it into the how and the why. The why is like, what about that book resonated with the public so that the how worked? And I think another thing that artists dislike about advertising is it's a way to discredit the work that they have done. Right? The only reason it's popular is because there was so much advertising behind it. And there can be a level of credibility to that. But like we've talked about, advertising can only push something so far, because if it's not good, if there is no why, like if there is no like resonance from the audience, right? Like I think this is how I write it. Like the idea of separating resonance and reach. And I think that in order to be a great artist, you have to be able to do both of these things, right? Like this idea of depth versus width of impact. The depth is the resonant and the width is the reach. Like, can you make something that is going to, yes, spread far and wide, which can, again, be attributed to the advertising, but that doesn't make your work great. What makes your work great is how much it resonates with the people who it gets in front of. And so this idea of, I don't want you to discredit your art because of the advertising. Like, I think that could be part of the hesitation, right? It's like people want their art to stand alone and be great because of it, like because of the art and nothing else. And advertising can be something that can take away some of the credibility of the greatness of your work because of the advertising that surrounds it. But the punchline is that if your art is great, advertising will only lift it up. Advertising cannot mask it. But advertising cannot lift up a bad book or a bad movie. You need both of these two things. These are two independent things that are complementary that you as an artist need to understand both. Like, yes, the art is the reason you're making the thing, but you have a responsibility to get your work out there, to understand how some of this work spreads. The why, the resonance, that is something that we're going to talk about in other episodes of Artwell, how to make great work that resonates with people. Today, we're talking about the other half of that, the why, the how that work got into the world. Another way to think about this too, and I've talked about this in the past on the George Miller episode, is this idea that the marketing of your work, the advertising, the promotion, whatever you want to call it, is still a part of the story you tell. Like, as an artist, you could make your work, and depending on like where you're at in your career, if people are helping you, you can write a book, give it to your publisher, and let your publishers publish the book, or publish a book and market it for you. But the thing is, like, it is your duty as a storyteller to involve yourself in the marketing, because the marketing or the advertising of your work influences how it is received. So to quote George Miller, he said, and George Miller, again, is the director and creator of Mad Max. He's directed every single Mad Max movie, the original one, Fury Road, Furiosa most recently, amongst some other movies. He's an Oscar-winning director for Happy Feet. He wrote the first Babe, directed the second one. And he said, the story, the so-called marketing of the film, is a continuation of the storytelling, and the level of care and skill with which it's done really is important. You can't misdirect the audience that you're inviting into the story, but you've got to be clear about what it is, and it's a really fine art, and to see it done so well is very, very exciting. Marketing is the audience's first contact with your art and will influence how they experience it. Therefore, as the storyteller, you need to involve yourself in how your work is promoted to make sure that it is in line with the experience you want the audience to have. A great trailer that gives away all of the exciting parts of your movie will ruin the actual experience of watching that movie. And so your responsibility as an artist is to involve yourself in the marketing and the advertising to make sure that the experience your audience has when they experience your work is the experience you want them to have. The marketing is a part of the story, of how the story is received. And as the storyteller, that is your responsibility. But again, that does not mean marketing can make a good story. You as the storyteller, you as the artist, have to deliver a great piece of art in order for it to work. This is quoting Lincoln's Doctor's Dog, which again is written by George Stevens. The first thing the publishers did after the book had been set in type was to send several hundred sets of proofs to booksellers throughout the country. Now, booksellers are long-suffering in many ways, and they're constantly receiving proofs of forthcoming novels from sanguine publishers. They obviously cannot read everything they get, but Anthony Adverse was accompanied by an unusually persuasive letter, and in some cases by visits from the publisher's salesman. This is the important quote. This was enough to make the bookseller begin the book. The book itself made them go to the end. I love that. The book itself made them go to the end. Marketing, advertising, word of mouth can get people to try your art. Your art is what gets them to actually finish it. Word of mouth can get people to pick up a book. Advertising can get people to go to the theater. But what matters is how good the art is. That is why advertising cannot take away from the work that you've done. Advertising only works if the work you've done is great. And if the work's not great, then advertising is only going to hurt it. You know, there's the quote later on in this book is like, by the way, there are plenty of books that booksellers don't like. Often a book goes out in advance and commits suicide because no one actually likes the book. So if no one likes the book once they read it, they're not going to buy a lot of copies. They're not going to recommend it to their patrons. But if the book they get is great, they're going to do that. Advertising does not sell books. Advertising can only sell a book that is already selling. And a book that is already selling is a book that is resonating with the audience. You need the artist to do their job well for the advertising to work. Now, you might be listening to this and you're like, I've made things that people like. Like, I know people like them, but not a lot of people like it's not a bestseller. It's not a hit. I haven't gone viral, whatever it might be. Because the truth of the matter is, like, a good book alone does not make a bestseller. Like, even if it's good and you have advertising, that doesn't mean it's going to become a bestseller. Like, something must happen to make people talk about it. A judiciously distributed sample, a book club audience, and a book club in like 1930 was different. It was thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even 100,000 for the most popular ones, who were basically signing up to a subscription of like a book a month. And every month, the part of the book club, you got a book delivered to you, and you did it as a way to like stay culturally upbeat, because there were people who were like tastemakers, would be like, this is a great book, everyone should read this book. And so if a book club was like, we want to use your book, so in the example, like with Anthony Adverse, they're like, we want to use you in the book club, that means your book is getting immediate distribution to tens of thousands of people. So that's obviously a big deal. A lecturing author, enthusiastic reviews, a celebrity endorsement, all these things are good, but not guaranteed. To make a bestseller, everything must click. People need to like it. There needs to be word of mouth. But really which is part of it. But then there's all of these other things that can sometimes be out of your control. How people experience the word of mouth. Maybe the celebrity endorsement, or a celebrity who reads the book and really likes it and they're talking about it. Enthusiastic reviews are out of your control. But really, like, truthfully, it's like, to have like a bestseller, you need the good word of mouth. People need to like the work. You have to advertise in the right way. Your publisher has to be able to like take advantage of some of these things, or you as the artist need to be kind of tapped in. Like, when an opportunity comes up, like, how can you make the most of it? Okay, Anthony Adverse is going to be picked for this book club. How can we make the most of that? Really, it is like, you want people to feel like the book is everywhere. Their friends are talking about it. They see a celebrity talking about it. They're seeing the reviews. They're seeing the ads. And once they feel like the book is everywhere, that is when it really works. And so you, as the artist, you need to make the thing that's good. You need to have some things, just like there's a level of luck that is required. It's not necessary, I guess, but that certainly helps to get more people talking about your book. Like, moving on to authors and advertising. This is Frank Swinnerton on this idea of like making your book feel like it's everywhere. And really, like, that's part of the reason, I guess, why like this boiling a pot of water is so effective, because you can find a small corner of the world and make your book feel like it's everywhere to just that small corner of the world. You don't need Oprah to talk about your book. If you can just pick this one college campus, you can find the coolest people on that campus to start talking about your CD. Again, this is you back to the Charlie Rocket example. And if the coolest people start talking about it, they're playing it at house parties, that's just going to kind of permeate to everyone in that small corner, right? And that is kind of like what you're looking at. You want to make it feel everywhere to this small corner of the world, and then move one step over and make it feel like it's everywhere to those people. You want it to feel like it's everywhere again. So here's Frank Swinnerton. We're moving on to authors and advertising now. It is not to be done by advertising. It is to be done by a grasp of psychology and a knowledge of expedience. If it were otherwise, all books would be bestsellers, which what the publisher knows, only a fraction of his output has any chance of being. The publisher takes his own way. He insidiously prepares those of us who read books for the treat in store. He lets us glimpse the book. We read a note about it somewhere. We read a review of it. We mysteriously find that those with kindred interest have also read notes, read reviews. We hear talk of the book from those who have read or are reading or are about to read, or who must read the book upon which we have set our hearts. Then it appears that wherever we turn, we find references to this book and advertisements of it. And we in our turn read the book and talk of it and recommend others to read it. And we find that the book is famous, at least in our part of the great reading world. The book has found its readers, its public. And whether we are small in numbers or many, it is the same. But the publisher has known that what we like, we speak of to those whom we would fain instill with our own ideas and our own enthusiasms. He has grasped our psychology, the psychology of the group. That is his business. But it has not been by advertising that he has reached us. For we never notice advertisements until the things they advertise are familiar to us. It is the same in all cases. Once we know a fact, we find it constantly emphasized. That line of we never notice advertisements until the things they advertise are familiar to us is the crux of this whole thing. Like, that is why word of mouth is important. That is why advertising does not sell books. Because what the truth is, like, advertising is a reminder to buy a book. It does not convince you to buy the book. Like, that's just why word of mouth is so important, because if you see an ad for a book you've never heard of before, you're not really going to pay that much attention. But if you see an ad for a book that your two best friends have been reading and have been telling you about, you're going to be like, oh, that's the book they were talking about. I need to get that. That's right. Advertising just reminds you of what everyone else has been talking about, and it reminds you to buy the book. It does not convince you to buy the book. And so the most important thing for you as an artist is to just get people to talk. What sells books more than anything, what sold books yesterday, what sold books today, what is going to sell them tomorrow is word of mouth. And here's Frank Swinnerton again. Only when we know something about a book do we notice its presence in the advertisement columns. And the thing which makes us buy books is simply and solely personal recommendation, talk, the sense that the book is in the air and must be read if we are to hold up our heads before those of our friends who read books and discuss them with knowledge. The publisher understands this very well. If any author asks any publisher what it is that sells books, he will hear from each and every publisher the same reply. It is talk. The punchline of this entire episode is if you don't have word of mouth, you don't have anything. This is why the CTA at the end of every episode of Artwell is, technically there's two, but the first one is always, if you liked this episode, send this to a friend who you think would like it too. Because no amount of promotion or advertising that I do is going to be as powerful as you copying a link to this episode and sending it to your friend, be like, yo, check out this podcast. I think you'd like it. That is powerful. And there's nothing I can do that can recreate that. And so that's why I ask you to do that. Like if you do support the show, that is the call to action that I give to you and to everybody else who listens, is because that is there's no better way of supporting the show. As I've kind of gone through this, I'm realizing that the amount of notes I took for the advertising of books by Stanley Unwin is a little bit longer than than Lincoln's Doctor's Dog, which is a little bit longer than the notes I had for authors and advertising. And the reason for that is because there's a lot of overlap in these lessons. And so I wasn't going to just give you a total summary of each section because it would get repetitive, and already even to this point was repetitive. But that's because I'm really trying to drill home the point of word of mouth matters. Find creative ways to generate that word of mouth and then ride that wave. And so in conclusion, I'll jump back now actually to George Stevens, Lincoln's Doctor's Dog, and he lays out 3 rules for becoming a bestseller. 1, an ounce of imagination before publication is worth a pound of advertising after publication. Again, imagination is the key word there. That is how you're going to find those ways to get your work in front of people where nobody else is trying to get their attention. It's how you're going to find those places where people can hear you whisper. And the thing is, most people are not going to use their imaginations. They're not going to put in the effort to figure these things out. Here's another quote. Book advertising, by and large, is not deficient in quantity, but that if general criticism of book advertising are to be made, they should have to do with the quality and value of the ideas that go into it. You are an artist. You could make some incredible advertisements. You could come up with some very creative ways of getting in front of people if you just put in the effort and use a little bit of imagination. 2, advertising sells a book that is already selling. I don't need to tell you any more about that. I've said that enough. 3, every bestseller gets certain breaks, and it is up to the publisher to know when the iron is hot. You could have a great book, you could have advertisements alongside of some word of mouth, and it still might not turn into a bestseller. There are certain things you need that are out of your control, certain elements of luck that are required in order for a bestseller to occur. And you just can't wait for that to happen. You have to put in the work constantly, because it is by putting in the work that you're going to get opportunities that you can make the most of. And so it is up to you, the person who's advertising it. With this quote, it's the publisher, but now it is you as the artist. When the iron is hot, when you get your lucky break, you have to be able to identify that and make the most of it. And the way you're going to be able to do that is by putting in the work. So do not get discouraged when the advertising, when the promoting, when trying to get this word of mouth going is not working now. It is going to teach you lessons that when you get those opportunities, you're going to have the skills to be able to make the most of them. To end this episode, I want to answer the question, bestsellers, are they born or made? The answer is they are made. They are made by the artist who not only makes an incredible piece of artwork, but also then puts in the work in order to get that work out there. None of this, while I say there are lucky breaks, none of that luck occurs without a lot of hard work that is put in by the artist. Bestsellers are made. that does not detract from the quality of the art. If the art itself is not great, it could never become a bestseller. Thank you so much for listening to my episode on the book Bestsellers, Are They Born or Made? If you haven't already yet, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. I used to not tell people what the next episode was going to be. I wanted it to be a surprise, but I was reflecting on this and I was like, I don't really have a big audience to surprise, and I have a higher likelihood of you coming back if I tell you what the next episode is going to be. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss part 1 of my deep dive into Peter Jackson, the director of The Lord of the Rings. If you did like this episode and you want to support the show, you already know what I'm going to say. Send this episode to just one friend who you think would like it too. And if you like the show enough that you want to go listen to more episodes, my challenge to you is to go and listen to an episode of an artist you've never heard of before. I think that Artwell is working at its best when you can listen to any episode regardless of who the artist is and still get value. And now, go do your thing. And whatever it is, do it well.